Good morning. It is Thursday, the 9th of April. I'm Maeve McMahon, and this is Europe Today, your daily dose of European news and analysis, live here on Euronews. Coming up, Israel has carried out its deadliest attack yet on Lebanon since its war with Hezbollah began. More than 200 people are reported dead in an assault that is prompting Iranian officials to maybe withdraw from the fragile ceasefire agreed with the US. We'll speak to our correspondent in Lebanon. And after very frank talks at the White House, NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte has said Donald Trump was, quote, clearly disappointed that US allies had refused to join his war against Iran. Relations are awkward with NATO allies, with the US President calling NATO a one-way street and warning Europeans to start learning how to defend themselves. And just 4 days to go until Hungary's parliamentary election, shaping up to be the biggest test yet of Viktor Orban's 16 years in power. From smear campaigns to allegations of foreign interference, the campaign has been toxic, and the European Union is holding its breath. We'll have the latest from the Hungarian capital. But first, a two-week truce between the US and Iran hangs on a thread this morning, despite yesterday's victory lap by some from the US administration. For more, I'm joined here in the studio by our US politics expert, that's Stefan Kobe. Good morning, Stefan.
Good morning, Maeve.
So we're seeing the ceasefire already beginning to unravel and the Strait of Hormuz closed again. Are we back at square one?
Absolutely, Maeve. This is a ceasefire in which fire has not ceased. I mean, for starters, Israel is still firing rockets into Iran, to say nothing to laying waste to half of Lebanon, which prompted the Italian foreign minister yesterday to warn against a second Gaza. As you said, this has prompted Iran to close the Strait of Hormuz again, and there are conflicting reports as to whether some ships could make it and could pass yesterday. And finally, we're hearing reports from Iranian airstrikes against some of the Gulf states.
And of course, what is in the deal? That is the big question as well. There's a lot of confusion about what's exactly in it.
Well, that's the multi-million-dollar question. Absolutely. There is confusion as to whether the English and the Farsi texts are actually identical. For example, Iran claims that it includes Israel and Lebanon, and Washington denies that. And that's a basic point, right? And a political problem for Donald Trump is that Iran walks away with more than it had under a similar agreement under the Obama administration. Today, Iran maintains control of the Strait of Hormuz, and the deal turns that waterway basically into a giant tool booth. That's why oil executives have reached out to the White House complaining about this. They were saying, well, we didn't have to pay any tolls before the war started, and now we have to. We thought we were winning the war. So that's a big problem, and there's a lot to talk about on Friday when peace talks officially start in Islamabad, Pakistan.
Indeed, Stefan Kobe, thank you so much for that update. Well, on the back of the news of the ceasefire yesterday, global oil prices did fall sharply and stock markets soared. But stocks are in free fall again this morning as the ceasefire looks set to unravel. To hear what this all means for us, we can now bring in the economist and professor Maria de Martís. Good morning, Maria. Thank you so much for joining us. So first, yesterday we saw markets very optimistic, but this reaction was premature given how fragile the ceasefire is. Do you think investors got a little bit ahead of themselves?
Well, I think everybody's looking for good news, and that is true for investors as well. The fact that we do have a truce, the possibility of peace talks is a very good idea, and we are looking forward to that. But everything remains so fragile. And of course, we have Israel that has an independent view in terms of what this peace might actually mean. So the whole thing is extremely uncertain and will remain so. The volatility that it implies for markets will remain so, I'm afraid, at least in the short run.
And as tensions escalate again, how quickly will prices spike up, do you think?
Oh, I think the experience of the past few weeks, but also the experience we've had back in 2022 show that prices can be extremely volatile in both directions. So I think, to the extent that the peace deal might actually fail, we're going to see a huge spike again. I hope this will not be the case, but volatility really is the order of the day.
So what will this mean for European households? Our viewers tuning in this morning, should they expect high inflation?
Well, we see it already in the petrol station where we go and reload our cars. I think we've seen it there. We might see it in our electricity bill, depending on what kind of contract we have. And there are big differences between both contracts and between countries in the EU. But then after that, we already see that the European Commission is downgrading its growth estimate for 2026, irrespective of what happens from now on, and is actually upgrading its inflation forecast for 2026 by about 1%. So yes, the economic cost is already there.
And of course, whatever happens, some long-term damage is already done. Maria Demirtis, thank you so much for joining us this morning here on Europe Today. Now moving on, the United Nations has warned that the scale of the killing in Israeli strikes against Lebanon is, quote, horrific. They've called on the international community to help end the unfolding nightmare. Italy and France have already spoken out. And for their part, the European Commission has told Israel to stop the violence and respect the UN peacekeeping mission. Speaking yesterday at a press conference here in Brussels, they said they call on Israel to cease the operation and respect Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity. For more, we can actually cross now straight over to Lebanon and bring in our correspondent in the coastal town of Tyr, which is Sur in Arabic. Ekbal Zain is standing by for us there this morning. Good morning, Ekbal. Thank you so much for joining us here. Just tell us, how are residents doing there and how exactly is the situation? So we're having some technical issues there with the sound of Ekbal Zain, but we'll come back to her as soon as we can. But of course, all eyes here on Hungary, where parliamentary elections will take place this Sunday, which will have huge implications reaching well beyond the capital of Budapest. After 16 years in power, the Prime Minister Viktor Orban is facing a very credible challenge from Péter Magyar, whose TISA party is ahead in independent polling. For more, we can cross now over, hopefully, to Budapest and bring in Euronews correspondent Zoltan Sziboshegi, who's standing by for us this morning. Thank you so much, Zoltan, for joining us here. Just tell us first, what is the mood there ahead of Sunday's key elections?
Good morning, Europe Today. Thank you for having me. So actually, these weeks are the most turbulent times in the Hungarian politics in the last 30 years. There are leakings every day, every morning. All the politicians accusing each other that they are spies. They are talking about espionage actions, and people fighting on the street, they are arguing. The main reason is that actually for 16 years there were no politics in Hungary. The government party was so solid that nobody really believed that they can change it. And 2 years ago, Péter Magyar just appeared from nothing, actually from inside the system, and gave back to this hope to the people. They love them with religious love, and actually there is a shield around him. He had a lot of accusations with sexual abuse, with corruption, everything, but nothing worked out. If you look around in Budapest anywhere, there are huge billboards with the face of Volodymyr Zelensky, because they are telling that Péter Magyar is also a Ukrainian spy, but nobody really believes it according to the latest polls. What was a huge help for the Hungarian government, that J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, who visited Hungary for 2.5 days, he emphasized, actually he repeated the words of Viktor Orban, telling that, yeah, the biggest threat for Europe and for Hungary is the Brussels bureaucrats.
I've also been told that the Vice President of the United States coming and saying that Viktor Orban is doing a good job and is a helpful statesman to the cause of peace, that's foreign influence. When the European Union threatens billions of dollars withheld from Hungary because you guys protect your borders, that's apparently not foreign influence. When the Ukrainians shut down pipelines, causing suffering among the Hungarian people in an effort to influence an election, that's allegedly not foreign influence. It doesn't pass the smell test.
That was J.D. Vance speaking there yesterday in Hungary. And of course, before that, our Hungarian correspondent. And we'll, of course, have live intensive coverage over the next couple of days on Euronews.com. So do keep a close eye on that. But now we can bring you that interview that we promised, where our NATO correspondent, Shona Murray, had the opportunity to speak to Ivo Daalder. That's a former ambassador for NATO. And she started by asking him for his assessment on the very fragile ceasefire. Take a look.
Although we've been 6 weeks into a war, an extraordinary bombing campaign by the United States and Israel, and I think Iran has the upper hand. I mean, that has been clear for quite a while. Remember, the Strait of Hormuz was open before the bombing started. Ships were going through, hundreds of them a day. Now ships may be going through. We don't know how many. We don't know when. We don't know where. And in any case, the Iranians are claiming they will maintain control the armed forces of Iran will maintain control over shipments through the Straits. That is a massive change in Iran's benefit and to the detriment not only of the United States and Israel, but frankly, to all the Gulf states who need the access to the Strait and so many others who depend on it.
Well, I suppose also your heart would go out to the Iranian people who were protesting back in January, who were encouraged to continue their protests, who were promised that the Americans and the Israelis would assist them in regime change. And in actual, looks like the Iranian regime has an even more ironclad control.
Yeah, I think, if this war ends like it does now, not just a 2-week ceasefire by longer, we can say that none of the objectives, with perhaps the exception of the degree to which Iran still has a missile capability, that none of the objectives that were set out at the beginning of this campaign have been met. So when you look at it all, you say, why did we go to war? And if this is the result, you can't but conclude that this was a strategic blunder of historic proportion.
The other question is the damage that has been done to NATO. I mean, you mentioned earlier there that allies have said this is not our war. NATO is a defensive organisation. You know, they were pretty clear cut about that. Donald Trump is threatening to leave NATO. He's humiliating NATO. It's a paper tiger. What is the impact of this?
Well, I mean, clearly what's happened over the last 6 weeks has been extraordinarily damaging to NATO, coming on top of the extraordinarily damaging episode of agreements. And I think the 3 months that have just passed, we will look back at it as the worst crisis that NATO has had in 77 years. It will end up with all European countries doubting that the United States, or at least a United States led by Donald Trump, can still be counted upon as a reliable ally when it comes to Article 5 or the collective defense of their territory.
I know that Vladimir Putin is really, can't believe his luck with this war in Iran. I mean, Donald Trump removed some of the sanctions on oil and so on. But if, let's say, he were to maybe test Article 5, maybe going into Estonia or one of those places, I mean, do you think that he might be a little bit more inclined to do that now, seeing the disarray within the alliance?
Oh, absolutely. I think we are living in an extraordinarily dangerous period of time. We see a divided NATO, which has been the goal of first the Soviet Union and then Russia for the better part of 80 years. A NATO that is truly at loggerheads, a NATO in which the President of the United States says, I'm not going to defend you. Don't count on me, as he put it, or bye-bye, as he said on his press conference on Monday. It's a good time to test NATO if you are sitting in Moscow. By the way, it's a good time to test what you could get away with in Taiwan if you're sitting in Beijing, because much of the U.S. military capability has been moved to the Gulf, and indeed much of the U.S. military capability has been expanded on this war, which turned out to be a strategic blunder of historic proportion. So we're living in a world where the possibility of major adversaries taking advantage of European weakness and American self-inflicted wounds is larger now than any time in my lifetime, and frankly, probably any time in anybody's lifetime.
Final question, Ivo, because you're a dual national, you're born in The Hague, but I want to ask you a little bit about Mark Rutte's modus operandi when it comes to Donald Trump, because some people have found it a bit grating over the last few months that he hasn't been firm enough with Donald Trump. We saw in The Hague him referring to Trump as daddy and so on. Sometimes that's a bit of a joke, but there's a feeling that maybe he just plays it up to Trump a little bit more to the detriment to the European allies. What's your own interpretation?
I think the big problem that Rutte faced is on the issue of Iran. He probably went too far. He probably went too much in the direction of supporting the president, particularly since 31 of his 32 constituents believed that the war that the president of the United States had started was both unnecessary and, most importantly, illegal. And as a result, supporting the president sort of alienated him with many other countries.
Shona Murray there speaking to Ivo Daalder. And now for the view from Lebanon, we can cross over once more to southern Lebanon, to the coastal town of Tyre, which is Sur in Arabic, and bring in our reporter Achbel Zain. Good morning, Achbel. Just tell us, how are residents doing there, and describe the situation on the ground.
Good morning, Maeve. Well, as I said, today is a national mourning day in Lebanon for hundreds of civilians who were killed and wounded yesterday by Israeli airstrikes that targeted multiple areas in the country. That airstrikes came without warnings, and the bombardment continued overnight. Ambulances were racing, hospitals asking urgently for blood of all types, and also rescue missions were becoming more and more difficult as tens of people were stuck under the rubble. That sustained wave of bombardment was sending a clear Israeli message that Israel, at any costs, refuses to include Lebanon in any potential ceasefire between Iran and the United States.
And how does that make people feel there? Are people now fleeing for fear of their lives?
Well, when the ceasefire was announced and following Pakistan's statements, hopes were really high in the country that we might be included in that ceasefire. So yes, most people first tried to rush and come back to the south, yet the Lebanese army prevented some of them because it's not safe yet. And yesterday, the Israeli army targeted the last sea bridge linking south areas to north areas of Litani River to prevent people from returning to the south and also to assure that the war has not ended yet. Last day was one of the hardest days from the beginning of the war, and people feel terrified and traumatized. So, many of them say that what's happening right now in the country goes beyond Lebanon, and the country is somehow in the middle of a regional equation between Iran trying to reunite the front again and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu trying to separate them. So for now, all eyes are on the coming hours to see how things will evolve and unfold eventually.
Indeed, on a very, very fragile situation. Stay safe, and thank you so much for bringing us that live update there from Sur. Now, coming up, as we said earlier, this Sunday, Hungarian parliamentary elections. For more on what the outcome of these parliamentary elections could mean for EU-Hungarian relations, our reporter Jakub Janis now takes a look at the stance of both candidates.
If there is one thing everyone is watching in Brussels right now, it is the Hungarian elections happening this Sunday. On one side sits Viktor Orbán and his ruling Fidesz party, and on the other is Péter Magyar and his challenger Tisza party. But when it comes to the biggest European issues, your reporter was curious whose side they're actually on. If they shared a flight to Belgium, their views on Brussels could not be more different. Orbán fights EU influence to protect national sovereignty, whereas Magyar wants to repair the relationship, but avoids looking like he takes orders from the EU, deliberately keeping his distance from leaders like Ursula von der Leyen. Okay, but when they pick up the phone, who is on the other end? Orbán maintains tight ties with the Kremlin. His foreign minister was even caught briefing Moscow around key EU meetings. And Magyar condemns this, accusing the government of acting on Vladimir Putin's behalf. However, looking next door to Ukraine, they differ in theory but share a political calculation. Orbán regularly blocks EU aid, campaigning on the fear of war. And Magyar avoids speaking about Ukraine, and his party opposes Ukraine's fast-track EU membership. But you see, there is a slight difference between them. Magyar personally delivered aid to a Russian-bombed children's hospital in Kyiv. Finally, looking across the Atlantic, Orbán relies on his close friendship with Donald Trump, even hosting US Vice President J.D. Vance this week.
Mr. President, you are on with about 5,000 Hungarian patriots, and I think they love you even more than they love Viktor Orbán.
And Magyar rejects this kind of personality-driven diplomacy, promising to root out Russian influence and restore Hungary as a reliable NATO ally. So as you can see, all of that paints a very intriguing political picture. However, let's not forget that in these elections, Hungarian opposition leader faces a severely unequal playing field. After 16 years in power, Fidesz maintains a massive grip over the state and public money, using redrawn voting districts and compliant media to gain advantage. And with Hungarian social media flooded with deep fakes targeting Péter Magyar and Tisza party, Sunday's vote will decide if the facts or the fakes shapes Hungary's future.
Akabianis there reporting for us, and you can read more about the high stakes of these elections on Euronews.com. But for now, thank you so much for tuning in to Europe Today. Stay tuned with us here on Euronews for a brand new episode of The Ring, brought to you from the European Parliament here in Brussels. Take care and see you soon on Euronews.